Inside North Dakota Politics with Nicholas Kwolek, Josh Meny, and political correspondent Maddie Beer Temple.
Good morning, I'm Nicholas Kwolek.
I'm Josh Meny.
And I'm Maddie Beer Temple, and this is Inside North Dakota Politics.
You just heard all about the big happenings in Washington, D.C. this week, so we're going to get right into the action at the North Dakota Capitol.
That's right. A bill that would make it easier for North Dakota to ignore federal law got the green light. House Bill 1282 narrowly passed the chamber this week. It would create a 14-member committee on, quote, the nullification of federal laws. The group would be able to take an executive order or law to the legislature to let them decide whether or not certain federal laws should be enforced. Bismarck Republican Representative Rick Becker assured the House that the committee would not determine whether a law was constitutional, rather simply whether North Dakota was going to enforce it.
I swore an oath to the 4 pages of the Constitution, not the 67,000 pages of the Federal Register. The Constitution is sacrosanct. It's 4 pages. It's entirely different. I did not swear an oath to all of the other garbage that comes forth from the swamp in D.C.
The next step for that bill to become law is approval in the Senate and eventually the governor's signature.
The House has okayed a bill that would ban transgender athletes from playing on sports teams according to the gender they identify with. House Bill 1298 passed overwhelmingly after nearly an hour of debate. Supporters argue the bill would protect female athletes from competing against players who could be more dominant. Opponents say it discriminates against students.
Do you seriously think it's the role of this legislative body to determine whether one is too big or small or weak or strong to go out for a school sports team?
It is about protecting the rights of women and girls, which were created under the 1972 Title IX Act Education Amendment provisions.
In the end, 65 representatives voted yes, 26 no. The bill now goes to the Senate.
Some Native Americans in the state say now is the time for North Dakota to come to terms with its past. Maddie, you dug into this bill. What can you tell us about it?
Josh, Nicholas, the legislation would create a commission comprised of tribal members. It's meant to improve the divide that the bill sponsor says exists between Native people and North Dakotans.
Representative Ruth Buffalo introduced House Bill 1488 to create a Truth, Healing, and Reconciliation Commission.
This really has been a long time coming.
Representatives from each of the state's tribal nations would comprise the 5-person group, which would provide a forum for Native people to discuss their experiences and, quote, clarify the historical record between the state and tribes.
People are ready for action. People who have lived experiences for decades are ready for action. And it's time to heal.
The commission would report to the governor about proposed methods to address what the bill describes as historical trauma tribal members have experienced. It would also call for an annual summit at the International Peace Garden.
Unfortunately, there is still some gaps within our systems, a lack of understanding, a lack of knowledge. So this really serves to provide education and to really foster growth and understanding across the communities in North Dakota.
Carol Two Eagle says a conversation she overheard months ago has convinced her why a commission like this is needed.
And I heard people say things like, well, if Indians are citizens of their own country, how can they also be citizens of ours? And how come they can vote here? I addressed this to these people and they just stood there and stared. And finally an old woman said that I needed to learn my place and not speak to my betters.
If passed, North Dakota would join a few other states and countries with a commission, including Canada, which was brought up as an example in the bill's hearing.
Canada established the Truth and Reconciliation Commission with a clear mandate, a timeline, and received a final report that contained calls to action.
The House Human Services Committee did not yet vote on the bill.
The bill has a sunset provision that would end the commission in 2025, but Buffalo said she hopes the Peace Summit would continue beyond that.
Andy, thank you very much. A bill to raise tobacco taxes went up in smoke last week. The House bill would have increased the state's tax on cigarettes and other tobacco products. Currently, the state tax on a pack of cigarettes is 44 cents, which would have been raised to $1.44. Opponents of the bill say the increased sin tax would hurt the poorest and lead to black market sales. But the bill's sponsor says it would improve public health. The House rejected the bill 33-58.
Back in November, the Supreme Court ruled against Governor Burgum's attempt to fill a vacant legislative seat. House Bill 1461 would make the legislature responsible for filling their own vacancies going forward. Under this proposal, the governor is able to fill a vacancy in a state or district office, but not a vacancy in the office of a member of the Legislative Assembly. The full House has not yet voted on the proposal.
A resolution would add a constitutional amendment to allow for online poker. And if passed, it would then be up to the voters in the 2022 general election. Those opposed, including the legal counsel for Turtle Mountain Band of Chippewa Tribe, worry that online poker revenue would go out of state to private companies instead of to state or tribal funding. Supporters say the demand for poker exists in the state, and it would be licensed and regulated if passed. 5 other states currently offer online poker.
So the Cub on Inside North Dakota Politics will be joined by a senator who thinks lawmakers should get together every year instead of every 2 years. Hear about his proposal next.
Protect, monitor, and manage your grain bins with IntelliFarm's Bin Manager system. Bin Manager is the only grain bin automation system that dries, cools, and even rehydrates your grain. By keeping your grain in peak condition, you can preserve contents while maximizing your profits. You can also access your bin's data from any smartphone, tablet, or computer. More importantly, our system requires zero entry to ensure your safety. Gain peace of mind all year round with your grain storage from IntelliFarm's Bin Manager system.
The most important thing in the Chevy Equinox is not front pedestrian braking. And it's not forward collision alert either. No, the most important thing in the Equinox isn't any of the advanced safety features we've put into it. It's what you put into it. Chevy Safety Assist, standard on every 2021 Chevy Equinox.
Current Chevy owners with an eligible GM credit card can get a $5,750 total allowance on most 2021 Equinox models. Visit westdakotachevy.com.
Hi, I'm Jamie. Welcome to Complete Nutrition. The holidays in 2020 are over. It's time to lose those pounds. Instead of another unsafe fad diet, at Complete Nutrition, our products are safe, they're effective, and they come with proven results. We will build you a targeted weight loss kit that will trick your body into thinking it's running a marathon all while you go about your day. You will lose weight starting today. Come on in to Complete Nutrition where you can try it before you buy it. Success starts here at Complete Nutrition.
The coal industry, that's what got me here.
My job at the coal mine was a blessing.
Almost everyone who lives in town is either in the coal industry or they're related to someone in the coal industry. Really, this community's heart and soul is in the coal industry.
I'm Lee.
I'm Kate.
I'm a heavy equipment operator.
I work at B&I Coal in Center, North Dakota.
And I am Lignite.
To Inside North Dakota Politics on KX.
If you didn't know anything about North Dakota state politics, you might perhaps find it odd that the state legislature doesn't meet annually. As a matter of fact, there are only 3 other states whose legislatures meet every 2 years, one of them being Montana. Then again, you may ask, is there a need to do so? Our guest today and others feel there is a need. Joining us now is District 1 Republican State Senator Brad Beckedahl. Senator, thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Certainly. Now, you are once again advocating for annual legislative sessions. Tell us why you keep wanting to see this happen.
Well, the biggest reason is we've gone from a state budget of about $1.5 billion a couple of decades ago to now spending $15 billion a biennium. We still have the same process where we meet once every 2 years to pass and approve that budget. And then we live that budget for 2 years without having any ability to change, amend, or revise that budget if we need to. So with the changing times we have, with the economy tied to oil and gas revenues and ag revenues in North Dakota, both global commodities with global pricing systems we don't control, it's a feeling of many of us that we need to be more nimble to react to the downturns in revenue as well as the upturns in revenues. And an annual session would allow us to do that. In fact, the session that we're proposing for the even-numbered years, we currently meet odd-numbered years only, but the even-numbered years would be called what we could call a short session, only for a budget review process for the entire legislature to say, are we good, or do we need to make corrections?
Okay. And so now, what is the biggest criticism that you've heard about trying this bill again?
I think the biggest criticism is just change. People just don't like to see change happen. But we're here to serve the public, and if we're not serving the public in a timely manner, we're not doing our job in my mind. So that's the biggest reason. I've heard some people criticize that it'll turn us into a full-time legislature. It won't. The bill is specifically designed to only allow us up to the 80 days we have now by the Constitution. We almost used 80 days of session since I've been here. This is my 4th session now. And we almost used all those already. So the fact that we're still limited to 80 days doesn't turn us into a full-time legislature. It only brings us back once a year in the even-numbered years to fix anything we need to.
Now, I'm sure people hear this idea and they think, oh, this is going to cost taxpayers more money. Can you tell us about that?
The fiscal note, which is analyzed by the budget experts we have in the state, they right now budget for 77 days for this odd-numbered year session to be in session. We have up to 80 days to use. So what they've done is they've said we're going to say that the short session in the even-numbered year is going to be 3 days, and the expenditure cost for a 3-day session is $159,000.
Okay. And now you apparently there has been some progress in getting this bill passed, correct?
Well, we've done well in the policy committees, and those are the ones that review the policy about why we need it and recommend based on that. It's the Appropriations Committee where we had some difficulty, and not necessarily because of the fiscal note or the cost. $159,000 in a $15 billion budget is not that measurable. I understand it's money. But we would probably spend that $159,000 anyway if we went to 80 days this session. So I think that's negligible. So we need to work through the Appropriations Committee, change some minds there, bring some things up to date, and just say, let's let all of the legislators, which I believe we should be doing now, come back once a year, look at the budget, and say, let's fix something if we have to. And if it's just to get a report to say things are fine, that would be good news.
Now, I know it's hard to predict into the future, but if this, in fact, gets through, what do you think will be the biggest difference versus the previous times you've tried to get this?
I think going through the COVID event, as you know, when we're a system, when we're not here in session, the governor has full control of the agencies and whatever needs to be done. And with the emergency declarations, I'm not saying the legislature would have done anything different, but had we had the ability to come back here and be here before that all happened, which was, by the way, in an even-numbered year, we may have been able to address things. We also, other than the executive branch, we also have public hearing processes. We take public input. The governor gets it, but not directly like we do. So from the standpoint of direct contact with the citizens and having them have a say in what decisions are made, I think it's a better way to go.
Senator Brad Beckedahl, we appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Have a good week. Thank you.
Next on Inside North Dakota Politics, a conversation with our very own Secretary of State, Al Jaeger. Stay with us.
The new Highland Suites Extended Stay Hotel in Minot features newly renovated extended stay suites, as well as our traditional suites. Book your room today and always feel at home with Highland Suites.
My life as an anchor is serving the public. I did these 2 news internships in college, and they definitely opened me up to a world I had never experienced before. I like that it's fast, it's relevant, it's what you need to know. The best part of my job is just connecting with viewers, doing good, clever, smart reporting that viewers enjoy and find value out of. I'm Josh Meny, and I'm an anchor for Good Day Dakota.
In the truck game, greatness is defined by a relentless commitment to the customer, forged over decades, built by a team resolute in helping you achieve your greatness. Experience this award-winning lineup today. Ford F-Series, America's best-selling truck for 44 years straight and counting.
Now get up to $5,000 in total savings on the all-new 2021 F-150, only at your Northland Ford dealers.
Your business message in front of the right group of customers. Partner with an experienced team that knows how to make you stand out from the crowd. Take the next step. kxnet.com/result-driven. Irritable, anxious, fatigued. Signs of mental health issues may be easy to see, but the topic is often difficult to discuss. Half of all mental health illnesses start by age 14, but most cases are undetected and untreated. Join us for a KX News Town Hall as we speak to experts in the education and mental health fields about the warning signs of mental health problems, how to know if your child is struggling, and how you can help. Bringing mental health to light. Thursday at 6:30 on KX News. Inside North Dakota Politics on KX.
Some bills are submitted to add, others to subtract. Then there are those meant to make corrections and update. And that's what we're talking about today, but not with one of our representatives or senators. We're pleased to be joined by our very own Secretary of State, Al Jaeger. Secretary Jaeger, thanks for being here.
Well, thanks for inviting me.
Absolutely. We wanted to speak with you today, in fact, about making sure current statutes are in line with forthcoming legislation. One example we cite is Senate Bill 2250 regarding combative sports. Now, one of your responsibilities is being Commissioner of Combative Sports. This bill, I suppose you could call it a cleanup bill, correct?
Well, yes. Really, the bill is designed to remove obsolete language from the Century Code. One needs to keep in mind that the Century Code is really a living document. It changes. There are things that become obsolete, and when they become obsolete, they should be removed. There's always laws that are being edited, changed through the legislative process, and I think it's one of our duties as officials to make sure that the Century Code is as clean and clear as it possibly can be.
So tell us a little bit about the process. In other words, whose eyeballs are on the Century Code and how often to make sure bills like this get put into place?
Well, I can't speak for other offices. I can only speak for our office, and the fact that I'm the Commissioner of Combative Sports, this is something that we work on, and so we become aware of this particular chapter in the Century Code, that these two sections, one of it goes back to 2005. That language just doesn't need it anymore. Last year, we did a major update on our rules for mixed fighting style and boxing, which is part of the combative sports, and we realized that there was another piece of law that was obsolete and no longer needed. To make the change, then, we do have the option way back in December to submit an agency bill. But in this particular case, we found a legislator who was happy to sponsor the bill for us. And so it goes through the legislative process where it did have a hearing, did pass the Senate, and it'll now go over to the House. And so it's just a matter for our agency to take the lead in terms of the laws that impact this office and the people that we serve. And so this isn't the only piece that we have, but we have other pieces that in the business area that are not necessarily major changes, but they're changes to streamline the business process, to streamline the processing. So this is just one of the things that we do.
Sure. Now, did you yourself help to update this language, I suppose, or was it all you?
Well, in this particular case, with combative sports, it pretty much comes down to me because my staff is so busy with everything else that this is one area that I do oversee. But this was a very easy bill to put together. This wasn't hard at all.
The area of expertise, I can certainly understand that. And speaking of which, how often would you say in your career as Secretary of State have you had to adjust bills like this?
Well, this is my 15th session, and we've had bills like this every session.
Okay. So, and is this something where you find that the statute has to coincide with the legislation coming up? So this is a frequent thing, you would say?
Well, this isn't, we can't look forward. There could certainly be something that would be changed this particular session that we have to respond to. But that's what we're watching now. As bills come in, we track them. If there's something that's going to impact our office in a manner that maybe the legislator didn't realize, we we testify and we bring it to the attention of the legislative committees through the hearing process. And so this is what's happening now during the legislative session. We're tracking quite a few bills that have been introduced to make sure that in the end that the best possible legislation comes through, and if it's something that isn't the best, that the legislators will agree and not pass it.
And if I may finally ask you, with everything that's gone on so far this legislative session with COVID, and how has everything gone in your opinion?
Well, actually quite well. We've been very busy. There were quite a few election-related bills that were introduced, and so we're working through all of those. But it's an interesting process. It's certainly different than the other 14 that I've been Secretary of State. Everything's virtual. There certainly are some advantages. There are some disadvantages. We don't have quite as much face-to-face contact. The halls are empty. Memorial Hall just doesn't have the activity it usually does in a normal session. But on the other hand, there are people that are able to testify that don't necessarily have to come to Bismarck. Testimonies out there. All the committee hearings are open. People can listen in. If they miss a committee hearing or something on the floor, they're archived. They can go back and find them. So there's certainly aspects to this session that are beneficial. Some are challenging, but overall, I think the work will be done to the betterment of the public.
Getting work done and making sure everyone stays safe and healthy for sure. Secretary of State Al Jaeger, always a pleasure. Thanks so much.
You're welcome.
Stay right there. We'll have much more Inside North Dakota Politics right after this.
It's tough, it's competitive, and it's game time. Things get real on Friday Night Frenzy. Join KX Sports for the breakdown of the biggest performances and the best upsets from high school teams around the region. Keep up on all the scores and highlights as Phil Bonatti, Luke Gamble, and David Gibson bring you the best Friday night sports action in Western North Dakota. Friday Night Frenzy at 10s, only on KX News, sponsored by ENG Lending.
Your news every hour in primetime is on News Nation on WGN America. Legendary journalist Sam Donaldson weighed in on White House coverage then and now.
We have questions that the public needs to have the answers to.
And eviction. News Nation reported on laws renters and landlords should know.
Families don't know their rights.
News Nation covers your nation every night starting at 8, 7 Central on WGN America. Go to newsnationnow.com to find WGN America on your cable or satellite provider.
It's here. The best President's Day sale ever at iKeating Furniture World. Amazing discounts store-wide. Low holiday prices in every department. Sofas and sectionals, leather furniture and dining sets, bedrooms and flooring. All President's Day sale priced. Save up to $400 on select Sealy adjustable mattress sets. Save up to $500 on Tempur-Pedic adjustable sets. Plus no interest for 5 years. Remember, prices like these don't happen every day. This is the one. iKeating Furniture World's incredible President's Day sale. Going on now.
Local news is unique to the communities it serves. Local news celebrates the human spirit through the struggles and the triumphs. Local news brings to light the questions and answers you seek. Local news is delivered by journalists who make North Dakota their home. Local news is the trusted voice amid the national noise, leading local for the communities we serve. KX News, putting North Dakota first. Inside North Dakota Politics on KX.
Bills go through lots of changes from the time they're introduced to the time they're signed into law.
Yeah, those amendments and tweaks sometimes result in legislation that doesn't resemble what it looked like when it was first brought forward. Eddie Beertemple joins us once again about how that's happening with one bill and why advocates say they feel they've been duped.
Thanks, Nicholas and Josh. I spoke with a few supporters of this bill weeks ago when it was first introduced, and now they say they're disappointed in what it's become. Senate Bill 2183 would cap monthly insulin copay costs at $25, but now that applies only to those with insurance in the state's public employee retirement system. Advocates of the bill's earlier version say the current markups make it unrecognizable from its original intent. But change is part of the lawmaking process, and those who brought the amendments say it makes the bill compliant with state law.
Danelle Johnson initially supported a bill to make insulin costs more manageable for her daughter Danica and other children with type 1 diabetes. But the text has changed significantly since it was first introduced.
I was very disappointed and heartbroken, obviously, for the people that I know that fight to survive.
Now the bill applies only to state employees.
We changed quite a bit with this bill. You can tell from the colors and the crossouts and so forth.
One of the biggest selling points of the bill was that it would cap monthly insulin copays at $25 for those insured with a North Dakota-based company. The new bill now does that only for those within the public employees retirement system, which is something bill sponsor Dick Dever says he tried to avoid in the first version.
We had excluded that in the bill because we can do that. And part of the reason we did that, or part of the reason that I think that it's not necessary that do, is because the insurance company could go back and calculate the cost based on the last 2 years spend on insulin, and they can say what would that have cost if this bill had been in place.
Senate Human Services Committee Chair Judy Lee says the PERS requirement is meant to test the impact before lawmakers could discuss whether to require it for other payers too. Danelle says she still supports the bill and is optimistic that if it crosses the House, it could be amended further.
I absolutely value life for everyone, and so I support the bill if it's going to help even just the state employees. And I know that sounds like, well, you're settling for so little. I'm not settling. I'm saving someone's life.
The bill has been re-referred to the Appropriations Committee, which isn't expected to make any policy changes on it. And Nicholas, Josh, a floor vote isn't yet scheduled, but will likely be in the coming weeks.
Patty, thank you very much. And thank you for watching Inside North Dakota Politics.
Have a great week.